Well, this is going to be a fun podcast. We're going to keep it around 20, 25 minutes max. And I really appreciate you jumping on the podcast today.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Let's rock and roll.
Let's rock and roll. What's up, guys? I want to thank you so much for listening to the podcast. We have hundreds of weekly listeners, and I wanted to make sure that everyone listening is hyper aware of how I can serve them best. So if you're interested in hiring me as your life coach or hiring me as your nutritionist, or maybe you just want to get some free advice, head over to lifecoachzach.com, book a free 30-minute consultation, serious inquiries only, and I would love to ask you serious, open-ended, powerful questions that are going to help you pivot your life in a better direction. Let's co-create an action plan and really step into the greatest version of ourselves. Here's the podcast. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Life Coach Zach podcast. Today is a very special episode because I have a very special guest, Dr. J.T. Wiles, clinical health psychologist with a nutritional psychology consultant background and self-proclaimed biohacker. I love biohackers. I love getting them on the podcast. We're going to talk a lot about holistic mental health, heart rate variability, biofeedback, health coaching, stress mitigation, peak performance, and nutritional psychology. Jay, how you doing today, brother?
Doing well, man. Doing well. How are you?
Dude, I'm doing really well. I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day out here in South Florida. And I just want to say thank you again for taking the time out of your busy schedule to hop on the podcast. If you don't know, this podcast is all about health, wellness, meditation, mental health. We talk a lot about nutrition. So you are the epitome of the ideal guest.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. Always excited to talk about those subjects for sure.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about your background. Tell us a little bit about your credentials and what you spend a lot of your time and work doing today.
Yeah, man. So I am a clinical health psychologist. And so what that means is I went and got my doctoral degree in clinical psychology. I'm licensed as a clinical psychologist, which means that I work with clinical populations. So individuals who have diagnosable mental health disorders, those who have kind of like the intersection of comorbidities, which is like mental and physical health related disorders. And that's kind of more of my general background, but I specialized in the field of psychophysiology, which is really utilizing different things like biometrics or data as a mechanism to track people's stress response and then provide them with tools and different types of trainings to help them self-regulate using that data. So I co-founded, I'm also the chief scientific officer of a company called Hanu Health. We're a digital mental health company, which continuously monitors people's stress response and then provides them with different types of holistic trainings like biofeedback and meditation and so forth, all with the intention of helping them to self-regulate their nervous system. So that's one of the things that I'm passionate about, is just teaching people how to become more self-aware of the things that are triggering stress, the things that are kind of resulting them in spiraling into anxiety, depression, and so forth. And then learning how to best self-regulate it by training and rewiring the nervous system. Because so many times when we're in a place of mental health struggle, it's because our nervous system is really dysregulated. And so we have to find a way to kind of tap back into what we were built to do, which is regulate ourselves and not spiral down into states of anxiety and depression.
Wow, all really interesting. All really, really interesting. Let's talk about how we measure our stress response. So when it comes to our stress metrics or data, like you said, I would assume it's cortisol levels. And that I'm not a scientist. I know nothing about neuroscience. I know nothing about the scientific discussions and topics, but tell us more about how we would measure our stress response and how we would regulate those stress levels.
Yeah, so measuring via cortisol is actually a mechanism. It's a little bit more invasive because in order to measure cortisol, you either have to do a saliva test or you can do a blood draw. So we consider that to be a little bit more invasive, especially like a blood draw. You can also measure things like neurotransmitter output. So you can look at circulation of things like epinephrine, norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine. They tend to be a little bit less specific in terms of our ability to kind of then say, hey, we see this number and therefore it equates to this. So it's not a great diagnostic marker. It's really just more informational. But the cool thing is that we actually have a mechanism for measuring the dynamic changes that are occurring in the nervous system, or in other words, your stress response, non-invasively through a biomarker or a metric called heart rate variability. And heart rate variability is quite ubiquitous nowadays. Basically, if you have any type of wearable, whether it's an Apple Watch or Oura Ring, Whoop, Fitbit, Garmin, they all include some form of heart rate variability monitoring, most particularly when people are asleep. And then, not to shamelessly plug our company or my company, Hanu, but Hanu is intended to measure that metric all throughout the day, because when we're going throughout our day, our nervous system has to adapt. And if it doesn't adapt, then we experience things like anxiety and stress and a poor mood and just a lack of contentment in life. Those things happen when the nervous system's dysregulated. So we can use things like heart rate variability in real time to watch the shifts and changes that are occurring in the nervous system, and then intervene with different types of practices to teach people how to better regulate.
Amazing. So these practices that help people better regulate their mental health, what are some of the most common practices and exercises?
When we see dysregulation of the nervous system, so let's say we see heart rate variability begin to drop. And so we see that downward trend of heart rate variability dropping, which, if people aren't familiar with what that means, heart rate variability is really giving us kind of like this insight and microscopic view into what the nervous system is doing at any given time. And so if the nervous system is having a harder time adapting to its environment, we'll see heart rate variability begin to lower. But when our relaxation response is kicked in, or our parasympathetic nervous system is kicking into high gear, we'll see heart rate variability start to elevate. And what that means is that the body is adapting really well to its environment, to its stressors. Now, if we do catch, you don't even have to do it if you catch heart rate variability sinking or trending downward, but if you do, there's some really great mechanisms for helping to better train regulation of the nervous system. First and foremost is changing the way that you breathe. So we know that breath work, or biofeedback, which is basically using technology as a way to monitor physiology while you're doing breath work, is a really good way to tap into the nervous system. And the reason why this is so important is because breathing is, number one, it's inherently a part of us. We're already doing it. But for most of us, when we're stressed, we tend to change the mechanics of breathing. So instead of breathing low and slow in the belly, we tend to breathe what's called thoracically, or from the chest. And we're not able to get and utilize a lot of good oxygen exchange. We breathe pretty rapidly, and we actually tend to take in too much oxygen when we breathe from our chest. So the single greatest thing that we can do is shift our breathing to low and slow. This helps to stimulate the vagus nerve, to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, and can raise things like heart rate variability in real time. The good thing is that if you hook yourself up, let's say, to a heart rate variability monitor, and you start to change the pace of your breathing, let's say you take it from average, which is 14 to 16 breaths per minute, down to, let's say, 6 breaths per minute, you're going to see really big peaks and valleys in your heart rate. This is called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. And basically what's happening there is that the nervous system is adapting by putting on the gas pedal upon the inhalation and releasing the brake on the on the exhalation. And that huge fluctuation increases heart rate variability. It stimulates the relaxation portion of our autonomic nervous system. And then we feel subjectively better. We see it objectively in both heart rate and heart rate variability. And that is a really useful strategy. So breath work and biofeedback. Another big one is meditation. So what we know is that in the moment, when our cognition is either being past tense or it's being future focused, a lot of the times cognitively we can spiral pretty easily, especially if we're not paying attention to the things that are going on in the moment. So one of the great mechanisms that we utilize for enhancing mental fortitude and stress resiliency is teaching present moment awareness, non-judgmental present moment awareness through meditation. So for us, it's a combination of, yes, maybe changing the breathing, but also just focusing on when those kind of faulty thinking patterns and cognitions arise, which they inevitably will, especially in times of stress, but then also they can kind of seem pretty random at times, is honing in on those just simply as an observer, noticing kind of what's going on without the intent of judging or trying to manipulate, just acting as basically a scientist of your own thoughts, distancing yourself from your cognition, and then allowing yourself just to experience the present moment. That can be a really, really key component to enhancing stress resiliency. And then there's other things as well. So we can actually fight stress with stress. And that always sounds like counterintuitive to people, but I always tell people, well, like, we know that one of the best things that we can do for our mental well-being is exercise. Well, what is exercise? It's stressing the body. Like, at its core, it is a stressor. We know that heart rate goes up, heart rate variability goes down. We secrete cortisol and epinephrine and norepinephrine. So all of these things that we think are kind of counterintuitive to enhancing our stress resiliency, They happen in the moment, but the idea is that these are hormetic stressors. In other words, these are mechanisms to induce stress so that we basically rebuild ourselves bigger, faster, stronger from a nervous system's perspective. So I say exercise is a really good one. Exposure to things like sauna or heat exposure and cold exposure can be great in enhancing heart rate variability, enhancing stress resiliency. Those are kind of like my absolute like go-tos. And then my other thing that I would mention here too for, enhancing heart rate variability overall, which is a huge pillar of kind of mental health and well-being, is good quality sleep. It's like if we are burning the candle at both ends, which it's really easy to do if you're a hard charger or if you like to party or if you whatever you do, like it's easy to burn the candle at both ends. And the problem is that it depletes everything, doesn't allow us to recover, and therefore we wake up the next day with no energy, no vitality, and our metrics are pretty off, and we just feel anxious and stressed. So I tell people that the foundation is really to focus on sleep. If anything, focus on sleep.
Right. Absolutely. Well, all great information. These are all amazing things that people can do for free, to help their mental health. So when it comes to meditation and breath work and present awareness, mindfulness, good sleep, cold exposure, sauna, things like that, are these more preventative measures or are these things that we do when we feel more stressed than usual?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. I think the literature, the research would indicate that it's a bit of both. So let's take, for instance, more the preventative measure. We know that people, even if they have really strong mental fortitude, we can strengthen that. We can enhance cognitive performance and enhance mental fortitude, enhance our stress resiliency, enhance immunological functioning. So that actually enhancing your immune system functioning can all be done through these types of practices, regardless of whether or not you're experiencing kind of chronic or even acute stress. So I would say that is a great thing to focus on. But certainly if you are experiencing stress, if you are experiencing anxiety, if you're experiencing some mental health related symptoms, we know that in the moment, doing things like breath work, doing things like meditation, doing things like non-sleep deep rest or yoga nidra can be extremely powerful mechanisms for shifting the state of your nervous system. Because when people are kind of stressed or anxious or depressed, their nervous system thermostat is turned in a direction that we don't want it turned in. It's adaptive if we need it. So for instance, I tell people that stress is actually inherently good. Stress is a good thing. If you didn't have stress, you wouldn't be alert to kind of everything that's going on in your environment. And we as a species probably would not survive if we didn't have some form of stress as a means of self-preservation and protection. The big problem doesn't lie in these stressors kind of impacting us, maybe one-offs. It's when it happens all the time and it compounds and compounds and compounds and we don't do anything about it. That's when stress is not a good thing. And that's where we need to intervene. So if we intervene by teaching our nervous system to regulate itself during those times, then we don't necessarily just eliminate the stress from happening. Again, that's a good thing, but we do dial down the volume, we dial down the intensity, we dial down the duration, and we're able to persevere in a much more efficient manner than if we were not practicing these strategies.
Absolutely. And let's talk more about Hanu Health. So is Hanu Health a wearable?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we sell like our platform as a wearable. However, we don't see ourselves as a wearable platform. And the reason being is because we're out to market right now with a wearable ECG. So a wearable chest strap, which is looking at direct electrical heart rate signal. It allows for high fidelity of heart rate capture, and we can look at heart rate variability continuously, which no other wearables are doing right now. For us, we do see ourselves starting to integrate with other types of wearables, not just kind of the chest strap that people have right now who are on our platform. But yeah, so more than anything, we're a software platform that integrates with other wearables. We just happen to only integrate with one right now.
Got it. Amazing. No, it looks great. And this is something that people would wear not just when they're exercise, but throughout the day to test their heart rate variability and things like that to see when they get more stressed than usual. And through this data, you would be able to proceed accordingly and alter your life and incorporate new practices and exercises to reduce that stress.
Yeah, that's it. So the intention is we want to act as kind of a continuous stress monitor. So think about it as like a radar that's always scanning your physiology for any signs of potential stress that is not good for you, or things that we want to catch a little bit earlier. So we know with heart rate variability, we actually want really good, stable heart rate variability. A lot of people have questions of like, oh, should we want a high heart rate variability, a low one? What you actually want is a normal heart rate variability, which is normal for you. We don't compare that metric to anybody else. It's basically like comparing apples and oranges. We really just want a good, stable heart rate variability. And with Hanu, if we see your heart rate variability begin to drop outside of your normal range for an extended period of time, well, what that's indicative of is that your nervous system is experiencing some taxation. And maybe the resources that you're deploying to help with stress maybe aren't effective, or you don't even realize kind of how stress is affecting you in that moment. So when we see that change in your data, we will push a notification to you and say, hey, something's going on. Like, we just wanted to check in. And it allows you the opportunity to log what we call in our app a life event. And you can say it's basically a trigger. So, I'm in the middle of my commute right now and somebody just cut me off and they shot me the bird and I'm, gripping onto the steering wheel. Or, I was in a really intense meeting with my boss who was talking about, 30% of the workforce being laid off. And so my nervous system was being really derailed. We allow you to log it. And then we always follow up with, okay, well, now we want to associate a new adaptive behavior with that trigger. Because a lot of times if you experience stress, it might be that serves as a trigger to, go eat some donuts or, go sit on the couch and watch Netflix for 4 straight hours or, do something else, cognitively spiral down into a state of like overthinking and catastrophizing and generalizing. All of these things can happen. So instead we say, well, how about we take the opportunity to regulate your nervous system so that the next time that this happens again, your body says, oh, I remember what you did last time and the time before it and the time before it and the time before it and so on. You condition this reflex to then just self-regulate because your body already kind of knows what's coming. Like, oh, wow, you've been in this commute and it stressed you out for the last 20 days. Yeah, exactly. So the whole idea is to condition a new behavior with that trigger. And if you can do so, you become kind of your own biofeedback device.
Amazing. Game changer. Because I feel like the hardest thing about awareness is being aware of your awareness. We don't know what we don't know. And being mindful, and like you said earlier in the podcast about like realizing when you're feeling stressed, sometimes we don't realize it till 10, 20, 30, 40 minutes, 2 hours, the end of the day, how stressed we were in the morning. We don't really become aware of those stress levels. So Hanu is really solving that problem.
Yeah, that's the intention. Yeah. The intention is to do those two components, right? Help people become more self-aware, because a lot of people, they don't, right? They'll go through their entire day, their entire month, their entire year, and things build and build and build until they either do one of two things. They explode, so they externalize behavior. They yell at their coworkers, yell at their family members, get into a state of depression, or they implode. Everything's kind of turned inward, which should be more like the depressive state. Like, these things happen when we're not self-aware of kind of all of this buildup. So if we can kind of come in and intervene early through the use of science and data to say, oh, we see those warning signs, your physiology starting to turn the dial in a direction that is indicative of you being stressed. Well, now we have the opportunity to then do our second component, which is intervene and teach you to self-regulate. Because we know that the main killer, if you will, or the Achilles heel to so many people's mental well-being is not being able to emotionally regulate. Like, their emotions just spiral and spiral and spiral until something really bad happens. And instead, what we want to do is intervene early so that we can teach people, like, you have the power within you to self-regulate. And this is nothing woo-woo. This is all balanced and powered with science. It's really just tapping into your nervous system and retraining it to respond adaptively instead of maladaptively or poorly, as it might be right now for anybody listening to this.
Genius. And the technology is there. So for all the people that want to connect with Dr. J.T. Wiles, you can go to his website, drjwiles.com. That's spelled drjaywiles.com. You can schedule a consultation with him. You can follow him on Instagram at Dr. J. Wiles as well, Dr. DRJAYWILES. And if you're interested in checking out Hanu Health, you can head over to hanuhealth.com. That's HANUHEALTH.com/product to get started. on your minimizing mental health struggles journey. Awesome. Dr. J, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you everyone for listening on Audible, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Don't forget to leave a review. If you're watching on YouTube, thanks so much for listening and watching up until now. We will see you on the next episode of the Life Coach Tech Podcast.